Adam, it's great to meet you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yep.
So, I want to begin our conversation with something I know we're all getting tired of, but living through a pandemic really
hmm
changed a lot of things for all of us. And everywhere in the country was different. The response was different from LA to Tampa to Kansas City. So,
Yeah.
ultimately, how did you survive it? And how did it change the way that you do things now?
Boy, how long is this podcast? That's so. I mean, I could go on for a while about it because it did change a lot of things for me. So when the pandemic happened, I was still in the military and I was in charge of my particular organizations in the military, our COVID task force, if you will. At first, it started off as just hey, what are we going to do with this COVID stuff? And I was in charge of trying to figure all that out. And then it turned into I'm going to need some more support. This is going to be a more longer term thing than we expected, and standing up a task force for it. So, I was in it pretty deep for a little while and trying to figure out what was going on, and like nobody was going to work, so my wife wasn't going into the office. I was trying to work from home sometimes, not work from home others, trying to figure out how I was supposed to homeschool at the same time. And it was like, how do I teach my kids while still working, 14-hour days, even in the office, oftentimes, even though the COVID stuff was happening and nobody else was in the office. But it was an eye opening thing for me that it didn't matter what control I thought I had in life. I didn't, right? Things are still going to happen that you don't have control over. Um, but it also showed me like, hey, I really like kind of being around my kids even during the day. I like this. I like being able to see them. I was not a fan of some of the stuff that was going on inside and outside of the government on how some of the things were going on. I don't know how deep you want to go in some of that, but it was just like it over those couple years. It was really eye opening for me, and I ended up losing my military retirement during that COVID thing. So I ended up getting out shortly before retirements. So there's obviously some bitter taste that comes along with that after 18 years of doing what I was doing. But in the grand scheme of things, I look at it and say, well, now I run business from home. I do podcasts from home. I homeschool my kids. They travel all over the country with me. And without, I think, having seen some of that go on, I'm not sure I would have done that. I don't know if that
Right.
would have been exactly the path. So, I just kicked the kids out of it because they do their homeschool right here in the office with me. So I just kicked them out because if I'm doing my podcast, I don't mind if they make noise in the background because I have a podcast about being a dad. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'm being a dad, right? But
Yeah.
when it's somebody else's podcast, I try not to have all of their noise in the back. But I'd say that it opened my eyes a lot in what actually mattered and what didn't, how I should be interacting with the world and how I shouldn't, how I should be interacting with my family and how I shouldn't. So again, I'll ask as I'm closing that part out, how long is this podcast? Because I could keep going on a lot of those things, right? So
Oh yeah, no, I dig it. No, and you did great. That's exactly what I wanted to get into without it becoming politicized. And I mean, it was just
yeah,
such a strange time period. So
yeah.
many things just did not make any sense. But I think the caveat of it is that people like you had this new lease and figured out things and found a new way to live your life, which is a silver lining all on its own.
Yeah.
you know so you've had quite a journey in life, as an author, an entrepreneur, combat veteran. So what I want to do to get to the heart and soul of what you do right now in 2024, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career
Mhm.
day, and one of the kids in the back of the room is really curious and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Boy, phenomenal question. I talk to people and I build and grow businesses. So that's kind of my nature right now. So I own a few different businesses. I've gotten to myself to be pretty passive on those. And now I mean I've been really trying to pour into my podcast. So I love talking to people, having good interviews with folks, and just kind of getting to know folks. And on a different level. I again I wouldn't be sitting in front of third graders because I homeschool my kids, right? So it's but I guess I sit in front of them all day, right? Plus some of their friends. So that that's what I do is I help people fix their businesses when they're running into problems, and I interview other folks on their businesses and how they're being dads. There's a few other things I'm working on in the background as well, but that's for the most part what I do.
The interesting thing about audio podcasts is that I've been doing it since 2011. And then all of a sudden the pandemic came around and it blew up and people started
hmm
really getting into it. It really is kind of a fun, therapeutic, very enriching space to be in.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's times really. I mean, I I see it on my calendar, a podcast coming up, and I'm like, man, I've got so much other stuff going on. I don't know if I want to do it. And then 10 minutes into the interview, I'm like, golly, I feel so much better. Like, this is
Yeah.
great. I'm so glad I'm doing this. Like, it feels good. I'm having this conversation with somebody, and it just puts me right into my comfort zone it is like, to your point, kind of therapeutic, where I get to kind of just settle in and relax a little bit and enjoy the conversation and not be too overly concerned about much other than just the person I'm talking to.
So most kids grow up wanting to be an astronaut, firefighter, in the military or something along those lines. What was your dream growing up? What did you want to be?
Yeah, both of my parents were in the Air Force, so I didn't know anything different. I bounced around the country, from military base to military base, and just I didn't know there was another option. Honestly, like even going through high school and other people are talking about college, I'm like, that's not an option for me. I'm going in the military. So like when I turned 16, the day I turned 16, I went and got my permit to drive, and then the day after I turned 16, I went and signed up for the Air Force. Like it was, that was just what I knew I was going to do. That kind of created a little bit of a slacker in me when it came to high school. Like I was like, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to be doing anything. It doesn't. I don't need to worry about good grades. As long as I pass, that's all that matters. But I knew that's what I was going to be doing. So I went and joined the Air Force, and my intent was to do 20 years and get out. So I always wanted to be a pilot, but I never knew how to do that. So I just joined, and I started out as an aircraft maintenance guy, turning wrenches on the stealth fighter back in the day. But yeah, I mean that's all I knew I wanted to do.
So how did the seeds of being an entrepreneur and being a podcaster and all of these things that have become who you are now, how
Mm-hmm.
did those get planted early on? Where were you born and raised?
So born in Minot, North Dakota, right outside of an Air Force base there, but raised all over. I graduated high school in Central New York, so that's usually, if I were to tell people where I'm from, I'd usually say Central New York, outside of Syracuse. I would say the entrepreneur bug didn't really hit me until I was in the military for quite a while. Like um, I'll rewind a little bit. As a crew chief, working on the aircraft, right? I ended up getting assigned to the Wing Kings jet, which is the guy that's in charge of that base has his own jet. It's usually the prettiest jet, the shiniest jet, the one that's in always the best shape, the one they're going to pull out to show everybody anything. So if you get assigned to that, it's a really good thing, right? Like they assigned me to that, and I was like, okay, great. But I started getting bored of like what I was doing. I wanted to deploy. I wanted to, like, I'm sitting here looking at all these other people going to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm sitting here turning wrenches on a jet. I need to go do something. So I ended up changing a different job, go and deploy multiple times, do all sorts of stuff. And I was like, man, I've done really well here. I ended up, uh, again, doing rather well in that particular job and getting selected for a few different things. But I was like, it's time for me to go do something else. So then I'm getting out, go to college. So it's like always trying to find something new and always digging into something new. I ended up going to college, and I was like, all right, well, now I'm going to go try to be a pilot like I'd always wanted to be. So I got selected to go be a pilot back in the Air Force as an officer. Ended up busting my neck and losing my pilot spot. So it's like, all right, well, I got to find something else to do. And it was just always something new. I need to do something new. I need to do something new. I got to have a problem to solve. And I go and solve problems and do things. And then my wife said, hey, we should look at real estate. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But I ended up looking at it and said, okay, we're going to go buy real estate. So I ended up buying, I started focusing on apartment buildings, started buying apartment buildings and doing all that type of stuff. Bought a few hundred doors of apartment buildings before I started jumping into the business side of it full time. So I got out of the military again, focused full time on one of my businesses. And really enjoyed that. Solved a lot of problems, fixed a lot of things. And it just, like, as I looked back at it and I said, man, I was always looking for something to fix and always looking for something new to grow into. It's like this entrepreneurial bug of mine. It's like that was how I was doing it and what I knew about it. I didn't know anything about growing a business. I didn't know anything about, the way I usually tell people is like, I didn't know even what a savings account was until I married my wife. Like I had that minimum $15 in it. That's all I ever had in my savings account because I didn't know anything about money, didn't know anything about business, nothing. But as I look back on it and go, okay, I was always striving for something new and trying to grow something different, to trying to build some other new skill set, which is what you have to do as an entrepreneur and a business owner, right? You have to figure out, you're always figuring something else, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in sales, whether it's in, the personnel side of it, hiring and firing, whatever it is, there's always something new that you're trying to grow and build. So I just kind of started building off of that. And that's one of it was one of those that slowly kind of creeped up on me just by buying apartment buildings that the business side came in. So I'd say it wasn't until I was in my 30s, probably probably early 30s, that I was really like, boy, this business thing is kind of fun. I kind of like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So who's been a hero? Who's been that inspiration for you, the fuel for you for all the things that you've done?
Boy, I would not have done any of this if it wasn't for my wife. So I've been married for 15 years. Uh, she absolutely changed my world in more ways than one. Not to mention giving me three beautiful kids. Like it's and I tell people all the time, like your number one choice in life besides I'm a Christian, so I think that choosing God is your number one choice. Your number two choice is who you marry. Like
Yeah.
it will make or break your life here on earth. If you choose the wrong person to marry, then it is just going to be a dreadful experience for you. But if you choose the right person and take your time and do it right, you're going to do really well, and things are going to go well. So she's my inspiration for all of it. Why I still drive in business, why I even got into business. So she would be by far who I would say is the number one on that.
So if you could get a dream guest for your podcast, anybody on the planet that you can talk to, pick their brain, who would it be?
Boy, I can only choose one.
You can have a few.
Okay. So on my particular podcast, I talk to business owners who are dads, right? So and how you kind of balance, if that, I think balance is kind of a misnomer, but how you can kind of work being a business owner and a dad at the same time and still be able to pour your heart into both. Um, uh, One of the people I love to listen to, especially about the fatherhood side of the house, is Jordan Peterson. If
Yeah.
I could talk to him a little bit to dig into kind of his thoughts on being a dad, especially now that he's doing business stuff, like I'm sure his brain is in a totally different spot now than he was when he was a professor. But um, uh, there's boy. My very first interview on my podcast was with my dad. That was like to me was like one of the number one things. I just need to
Yeah.
talk to my dad.
Yeah.
Which I would say, as not to try to talk too much about my particular podcast, but I think that if we can look back, especially men, at our dads and understand who they were and why they were the way they were as we were growing up, it gives us a huge insight into who we are today and why we choose to do the things we do and think the way we think. All too often, we want to blame our parents, and sometimes they deserve some sort of blame in some way, shape, or form. But don't think we don't deserve some blame when it comes to our kids later on in life too, right? Because there's plenty of blame to go around. But if we can look back and say, okay, why is it that my dad did this, or why is it that my dad didn't do this, and we can understand who they were, it can give us a whole different flavor of who they are. So I'd say that it's weird to juxtapose my dad and Jordan Peterson next to each other, but those two are so exciting to me to be able to talk with. I would love to be able to talk with Jordan Peterson and just kind of dig into, if for no other reason than to be selfish and say, how can I be a better dad and business owner at the same time? So
That's awesome. So what was the first podcast you got hooked on? What was the one that you totally couldn't stop listening to?
probably bigger pockets, just because
Yeah.
I was getting into real estate, and then this was probably, I don't know, 2013, 14, somewhere around there is when I really started digging into that. And then there was one that I used to listen to all the time as well, Stacking Benjamins,
Yeah.
because once I started learning about money, I was like, holy crap, I had no idea that people saved money. Like it just didn't, like I was around everybody that was paycheck to paycheck. That's all I'd seen my whole life. That's all I'd saw in the military. So once I started learning about it, I was like, I need to learn more about this. And I just like, it opened up the doors of learning to me. So Bigger Pockets and Stacking Benjamins were probably the first two that I was obsessed with.
So what is it every day that motivates you to get up and to do the work that you do? You're diversified, you got a lot going on. What
Mm-hmm.
is that ultimate motivation for you to get this done and the way that you want to get done to help people?
So I'd say it actually recently changed, right? So ultimately, the motivation is my family, right? And that's when I looked at it, and I tell people all the time when whether it's coaching, consulting, that type of thing, it's like you got to really focus on what your why is, and it can't be because I want money. If money is your why, you're never going to be happy. Like you're never going to find what you're looking for. But so for me, it was like I want to give my family and my kids everything I can, and that means my time, my money, my energy, my effort. Help them know what it is that life is like. Help them build more than just I want to leave them something, but it has nothing to do with the money. Do I want to leave them money? Sure, but that's not what it is. I want to leave them something that they can go and produce for the world themselves, that they can go and be productive members of society. So I've got two boys and a girl, and what I always said is my boys, and if you ask them right now, they would tell you, I said, what is my goal in life? And they'll tell you that it's to make them better men than me. And the only way to do that is to represent what it means to be a good man, and then let them know where my faults are, so that way they don't follow my faults, they follow the good stuff. And then now that I have a daughter, it's, my job is to raise her to find a better man than me. So if I could teach her to do that. So my ultimate goal in life is that, and then to enjoy the rest of my life with my wife. So that's where I dig a lot of this from. But there has to be some sort of impact outside of that as well. So recently, one of the companies I own is an education company that teaches military members and veterans how to invest in real estate. So that gave me a lot of purpose in trying to get people to start. If I can get folks to start at 20 years old, what I started doing at 30, 35 years old, 33 years old, that would be great. If I can get them a 13-year head start on where I was, that's a massive difference in life. So now I recently we hired out my position in that company. So now I'm just an owner and a board member. So now it's like, okay, I'm literally right now in the process of going, okay, what is my impact portion now? It can't just be about buying businesses and, that type of thing. So it's where's my impact coming in now? So we're kind of in the process of working through that on what the next big impact thing is. But there's always something I want to dig towards, but ultimately it has to be to help grow my family and their future.
So, speaking of youth, if you were to have a dream tonight, run into that version of you at 16 going to get your license to join the Air Force, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated, what
Mm-hmm.
advice would you impart on that version of you?
uh, Go down to Tampa and meet Raquel earlier in life. So no, we joke about that all the time. Is that I wish I would have met her earlier, and she probably wishes she'd have never met me at all. But no, the honestly, I wish that I would impart on me to never give up that drive for education and knowledge. I was in the honor society. I was doing all the stuff, and then I got a social life sometime around ninth grade or so. And I kind of let it all go because learning wasn't cool. Learning wasn't, and when I say learning, I don't mean like go to college, get good grades, do all that. I mean like actually wanting to learn about, being inquisitive about things, opening up a book because you want to, because you're interested in it, not because some teacher told you have to do it. But never let that go, because now I'm like a voracious, like I'm constantly wanting to learn about something new and dig into something, because it gives me a much more well-rounded understanding of the world, about who I am, about all sorts of stuff. So I would say never ever give that up, because the more you learn about things, the more you're going to drive into different areas of life where you never knew that you would have. Like I would have never guessed I'd be sitting on a podcast talking to somebody about any of this stuff, because like this wasn't even a thing in my brain that business would be something I'd be talking about, or reflecting on my past would be something I'd be thinking about. Like it's a never ever ever put the book down, never stop learning, never stop enjoying that ride.
So, aside from your family, when you look back on your life, of everything that you've done professionally in the military, what are you the proudest of?
I'm glad you said aside from family, because that, I think you've caught a theme in my life. That would be where I would go.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. So I was a dog handler for a while. So I'd go out and find bombs and do different things. If you'd asked me this last year, I might have talked about it a little bit differently, but I've kind of processed things a little bit more as I've gone through. But I'd say probably being a dog handler in Iraq and Afghanistan was one of the things that was the most rewarding and knowledgeable. One of the most not knowledgeable, knowledge bearing moments of my life, where I really realized who I was and kind of stepped away from like needing to be fake or prove anything or whatever. I mean, when there's something about being in a combat zone and stuff going on around you that kind of humbles you pretty quickly about who you are, and kind of opens you up to realize, okay, like you could just be you and it's okay. And I didn't necessarily learn it in that moment. It took me a while to kind of work through that and kind of know what it was that I was doing. But knowing that my dog was finding bombs that were meant to kill people, kill our people, was something that was super rewarding and felt good to say, you know what, I'm actually doing something good out here. There's some things that we're doing and I'm really proud of that. um uh and I'm sure if we talked for a little more, I'd be able to find some other things, but that's the first thing that pops in my brain.
So, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends,
Mm-hmm.
clients, colleagues, everyone in your life, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Boy, um I'm a strong-minded, opinionated, uh, a man who really wants to do well for his family and for the world. I am not very good at it sometimes. So, in that sense, one could say that I'm a failure, but failure is only if you don't learn from it. So I do my best to learn from it every moment. Strong-minded, strong-willed, driven leader who's looking for the next challenge at all moments in life, to be able to grow. So that's kind of,
Yeah. So
yeah.
let me ask you this. If anyone wants to tune into your podcast, reach out, learn more about your world, what's going on, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so my podcast is the BizDad Podcast, BIZDAD, BizDad Podcast. So you can find that anywhere podcasts are at. It's on video as well if you want to watch it on YouTube. You can reach out to me, Adam at RALCapitalGroup.com. I'm happy to interact with anybody who'd like to chat about anything that they want to. I'm the manager of my schedule, so I love being able to talk to folks, get emails, and interact with folks as much as I can.
Right on. Adam, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so very much, Joe. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right.